So welcome back, everybody. This is week 2 of our mindfulness group, our 8-week mindfulness group. I'm really happy to be here again with you all. For any of you who missed the first session, that's totally fine. You can just pick up where we are. So just so everyone knows, my name is Ashlee. I'm a counseling therapist and art therapist with Breelove Counselling. And again, we've partnered with the Canadian Mental Health Association of New Brunswick to be able to offer you this, this group. So before we jump into our topic today, which is on the screen when it's hard to be mindful, I just wanted to ask the group if anyone wanted to share a mindful moment that they had this week. For me, I'll start. I found myself, it was super nice to see the sun finally shining this week. And so I was outside, it was in the evening, the sun was kind of setting, so it was nice and hot. And I just kind of took a minute to listen to the birds and take in the breeze and feel the sun on my face. And it was just a nice moment to kind of take a deep breath and, to do it that way and to take in that moment and just be present and enjoy what I was able to see. Does anyone else want to share anything that they've experienced this week in terms of a mindful moment? On the other hand, were there any moments where you caught yourself not being mindful? Like, were you able to notice maybe that lack of mindfulness or that maybe that mindful sensation? I wonder, on the other hand, of maybe in contrast to being mindful, did you notice more mindless moments? Right. Yeah, it's great now that we have a little bit more flexibility and we're able to kind of social distance and with, I think, a group of 10, don't quote me on that, but it's nice that we're able to kind of see the people that we've been missing for so long, even if it's still, we have to stay outside and distance ourselves, but it's definitely nice to have those moments together for sure. Reading on the beach. Wow, that sounds right up my alley. I'm jealous. Doing yard work. Yeah. Just enjoying, it sounds like everyone's really been using their senses and especially sounds, hearing things, using that. It's great. Thank you for sharing, everybody. And even if you didn't find yourself noticing too many mindful moments this week, that's okay. And even if you caught yourself being in maybe a mindless state and kind of getting stuck in your head, even noticing that, even being able to have that awareness of those moments is really important. And that's still mindfulness, right? That's still developing that skill of attention and awareness of when our mind kind of gets stuck in maybe a thought process that it doesn't need to get stuck in. So it's still developing, and that's still developing that skill, and it's still progress, even if you found yourself frustrated by that and frustrated by the fact that you were noticing yourself being mindless more often. But this is part of the process. And this leads nicely into our topic, which is when it's hard to be mindful. So at some point in our lives, we all have to cope with overwhelming feelings and at times painful experiences. It can be physical, like a bee sting or a broken arm, so something like that. Or it can be emotional, so feeling unsafe, sadness, anger. So in both cases, though, the pain is often unavoidable and unpredictable. You can't always anticipate when a bee will sting you or when something will make you sad. We can't often know when that's going to happen. And as much as, again, we might try to plan ahead for things, unpredicted things happen to us all the time, and that brings up emotions for us. And so part of being mindful and having mindfulness skills in our tool belt helps us to prepare ourselves for those moments when unpredicted things happen. So often the best we can do is use the coping skills that we have and hope that they work. But for some people, emotional and physical pain feels way more intense and happens more frequently than it does for other people. Their distress comes on more quickly, and it feels more overwhelming, kind of like a tidal wave. And often these situations feel like they're never going to end. And the people experiencing them don't know how to cope with the severity of their emotions. So for the purpose of our time together, we'll call this problem emotional distress. So people struggling with overwhelming emotions often deal with their pain in more unhealthy ways, and that are often more unsuccessful in decreasing their distress because they don't know what else to do. So this is understandable. This is kind of a natural way that we all cope. We all have our kind of default coping strategies that we use more often than others. When a person is in emotional pain, it's hard to have that rational thought process and to think through and find a good solution to our problems. And we'll talk about that in, I think, maybe next week or the week after, about just the process that happens in our brains when we are distressed. So it really does shut off your brain. And so when we're in those overwhelming emotions, we don't have the ability to think as rationally as we would in a normal situation. So which is why it's often easier to lean into maybe those more unhelpful coping skills, because again, those are our default mode. We don't have to think about it. We just kind of fall into it quite naturally. And these things could be like watching Netflix or scrolling social media, maybe eating, or drinking or smoking. So many of these coping strategies used by people when they experience overwhelming emotions often can make the problem worse, or maybe only temporarily soothe the problem, but don't actually help in the long run, or also may have their own unhelpful effects. So most of our coping skills have been taught to us at an early age. And although they may have been helpful at one point, and may have been helpful in past experiences, if they've been left unchallenged or without reflection, it may actually be leading to forms of reacting versus reflecting or responding in a helpful way to our experiences. So it can be even harder to respond mindfully, like we talked about, when emotional and physical pain feels more intense and occurs more frequently than it does for other people. And especially if these situations often feel like they'll never end. And the feelings, like we said, come on really quick and they come on really overwhelming. So it can be really difficult to use those mindfulness skills that we're talking about and that we talked about last week in those moments when emotions are really, really high. Is it possible to be certain about everything in life? Great. Okay, I think we have a consensus there about that. How is needing certainty in life helpful versus unhelpful? So I think we've all heard the quote that the only certainty in life is that it is uncertain. So certainty can help us kind of plan ahead and think about the future, and it helps us anticipate and expect certain things, but it also creates fear and maybe a lack of flexibility when things do go wrong. So yeah, I guess maybe, but is there a helpful aspect to needing certainty for some people? How does that help you in life, or does it not help in life as well? Yeah, the only thing that's certain is change, right? But for some of us, that idea or that concept is really hard to grasp or hard to accept, that change is inevitable and change is going to happen, and we can't always plan and expect or know what to expect, I guess, at all times. I'm sure many of us can relate to that idea. And again, at certain points in our life, maybe things are going a little bit more, they're more stressful than they usually are. I think that can create, again, more of a need to have certainty because other things are changing around us. So oftentimes we seek certainty in moments of uncertainty. Yeah. And right now, right, with everything going on with COVID and the way things are going, it's definitely creating a big sense of uncertainty in a lot of us, related to our jobs, related to the finances, related to how things are going to look moving forward, our new normal. Like there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this pandemic. And again, I'm sure most of us are seeking comfort in certainty or finding certainty in our lives. So this is really that paradox that exists in relation to our emotions and how we deal with them. So it makes a lot of sense that we try and get away from things that feel unpleasant, right? This strategy works for other things that make us uncomfortable. So things like heat, cold, pain, hunger, etc., right? When we feel those things, we do something about them to get rid of them. We eat regularly to avoid being hungry. We take our temperature, or we monitor how we're feeling, and we can either add or take away layers if we're cold or hot. We use blankets or turn the heat up or down, right, to avoid being hot or cold. So we actively kind of avoid these situations when we can, and because these things cause us discomfort or pain, right? When we're too hot or too cold or we're too hungry, these things are uncomfortable. So we have strategies that we employ to get rid of them. So we kind of generally know that we can avoid most physical distress But when we apply the same strategies to our emotion, it kind of seems to backfire a little bit. And this is the kind of paradoxical nature of emotional distress. So that is, the more we fear and struggle with and try to avoid our feelings and our distress, generally the worse our distress gets. So our fear and avoidance of the distress actually magnifies our emotions. And unlike being cold or hot or hungry, there isn't always a simple and quick solution for our emotional distress. So if we kind of imagine our emotional distress as a big puddle of water that's blocking our path, you can recognize, we're going to use the analogy here, that the emotional distress is the water. And it's not something to be feared or something to run away from. It's just a puddle of water. And if you wait there, eventually it'll dry up enough that you'll be able to jump over it. On the other hand, you could splash through it and just kind of wade your way in and try and escape from it or get away from it as fast as you can. But by doing this, we don't know how deep the puddle is. It could be really deep. You might fall in. Or metaphorically, by splashing through it and kind of upturning things, you're actually making things worse. And by, I guess, in this analogy, we're going to use splashing through the puddle and kind of upturning everything as using our unhelpful coping strategies. And so soon enough, you might be faced with actually a deeper pond than you were originally, because you've been trying to use unhelpful coping mechanisms to try and get through it as quickly as possible. So the bigger the pond, the harder it is to find our way through, and therefore the longer we might feel stuck or unable to move forward. I also like the analogy here of a pressure cooker. So our emotional distress is like a pressure cooker. And the more we try and avoid it or try and use unhelpful coping strategies to deal with our feelings, the more the pressure builds and builds and builds. And we know with a pressure cooker, eventually we need to release that pressure somehow. And recognizing our feelings, acknowledging them, and working through them with healthy coping strategies are ways that we can kind of release that pressure and kind of release that nozzle. So here on the screen, I have a list of common coping strategies that are used by people to deal with their overwhelming emotions. So I'd like everyone to kind of take stock of these and just note how many of these that you use. So just keep a little tally. So you spend a great deal of time thinking about past pains, mistakes, and problems. You get anxious worrying about possible future pains, mistakes, and problems. You isolate yourself from other people to avoid distressing situations. You take your feelings out on other people by getting excessively angry at them or trying to control them. You engage in dangerous behaviors such as cutting, hitting, picking at, or burning yourself or pulling out your hair. You engage in unsafe sexual activities such as having sex with strangers or having frequent unprotected sex. You avoid dealing with the causes of your problems, such as an abusive or dysfunctional relationship. You use food to punish or control yourself by eating too much, not eating at all, or by throwing up what you eat. You attempt suicide or engage in high-risk activities like reckless driving or take dangerous amounts of alcohol or drugs. You avoid pleasant activities such as social events and exercise. Maybe you don't think that you deserve to feel better. And lastly, you surrender to your pain and resign yourself to living a miserable and unfulfilling life. So how many, if anyone feels comfortable to share, did anyone relate to any of these ideas or any of these coping mechanisms? Yeah. Food, yeah. I think food is an interesting coping mechanism in the sense that oftentimes we don't associate it as coping. Sometimes we just do it. It's part of, because we need food to eat, right? Or sorry, to survive. And that happens by eating. So I think sometimes we forget to look at it as something that might be a problem, because if we're eating, and even if we're eating too much or too little, whatever it is, right? If we're using it because of our emotions, if we're using it to cope with that, then maybe there's something underneath there that we need to be looking at more closely. So again, all of these strategies they're normal. A lot of people use these, but in the long run, and maybe everyone can reflect on that idea a little bit, it kind of leads to even deeper emotional pain, because these strategies often only offer us temporary relief, and then cause more suffering in the future. So I think something to reflect on is how do these coping strategies make you feel, and is it something that maybe needs to be attended to more than you thought? So how does emotional distress develop? So it's likely a combination of biological and environmental factors that lead some people to be more intolerant of emotional distress than others. There's some suggestion that biologically, some people are more sensitive to negative emotions, experiencing negative emotions more easily and at a higher level of intensity, and for longer durations than other people. So this may mean that some people experience negative emotions as more painful and have greater difficulty coping with those experiences. It's likely that growing up, you had experiences through your childhood or adolescence and even through adult life that shape how you deal with your emotions. So some people may have not been taught or shown to tolerate emotional discomfort appropriately. So for example, if when you were a child, you were punished for expressing normal emotions like crying or being sad, if you were punished for that or told not to do that, or that's not okay, then of course you're going to feel uncomfortable showing those things in the future or as an adult. So others may have only been shown unhelpful ways of dealing with our emotions, such as seeing a loved one use alcohol to deal with their emotions, or perhaps shutting down. Maybe you saw your mom or dad or caregiver just kind of close in and get really quiet and not really talk about things. Maybe you saw your parents or caregivers fight when things were overwhelming. Right. Yeah. The idea of, thank you, Deborah, for children are seen, not heard. Right. So those are all these beliefs that we're kind of told as young people that we carry with us throughout our lives. And sometimes they influence how we cope or how we deal with things as adults. And sometimes they're not helpful. Sometimes they actually get in the way of us being able to handle our emotions in a healthy way. Sometimes it may not have been something that you learned from your parents. It could just be something that you stumbled upon as a way to escape your emotions. And these methods have been reinforced by temporarily making us feel better. So using unhelpful methods, and you don't really have a reason to look for other ways of dealing with your distress, because it feels good to use the one that you're using at that temporary moment. So if this sounds like maybe a familiar attitude to you, then you may also perceive worrying to be useful for you as well. So some of us may think that worrying is a way to prepare ourselves for the worst. So getting us ready for anything that might happen. So in other words, we keep worrying because we believe that it's our only strategy to make things in life more certain or more predictable. So it helps us believe that we have more control. So our worry, anger, distress, fear, anxiety can all be magnified by irrational thoughts. For example, the thoughts that something bad is going to happen, or if I try to do something new, I will fail. These things might lack evidence, but it still has a really big impact on how we feel in the moment. If we can learn to examine the evidence and challenge these thoughts, it can actually help us deal with these thoughts and maybe overcome some of the anxiety that our thoughts actually give us. So we're going to try and put our thoughts on trial right now. So maybe everyone can kind of take a second to think about a thought that's contributed to your fear or worry or anxiety or depression lately. So just take a minute to just think about something that comes to mind. Maybe it's the first thing that comes to mind. That again, when you have that thought, you really notice yourself feeling anxious or depressed or worried or scared. So next, you're going to gather evidence that can support that thought. So only verifiable facts and evidence that goes also against your thought. So you're trying to gather things that kind of go for the fact or for the thought and go against that thought. So then you're going to compare that evidence, so the for and against evidence, and determine whether your thought is accurate or not. So things to ask yourself would be, is my thought based on facts or feelings? How would my best friend see this situation? How likely is it that my fear will come true? What's most likely to happen? If my fear comes true, will it matter to me in a week, a month, or a year? So by taking down some of these questions and really examining our thought process through the lens of these questions, it can really help us determine how valid our worries are, our thoughts are. They're valid in the sense that they're important because they're yours, and they're giving you feelings. But is it true? Is it fact? Or is it based on an irrational thought, and that's actually causing us more harm than it is good? Okay. So in reality, our worrying hasn't ever made anything more certain or more predictable. By worrying or feeling emotionally distressed, does it really change the outcome of what will happen? Isn't life as uncertain and unpredictable as it ever was, even if you worry? In fact, all we've done is think about the worst case scenario and worked ourselves up and made ourselves feel really bad in the process when we do tend to worry. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, is it really worth it to worry? Does it help us? Does it really prepare us for what we think is going to happen? I'm sure we can all relate to the idea of when we worry about something, and we're trying to anticipate what's going to happen, and then it happens. The scenario that we're kind of playing in our heads over and over happens, and the outcome is not anything like we predicted. It actually is probably better than we predicted. So does having that distorted sense of certainty justify all the negative consequences that comes from worrying? You answered no. There's two strategies that we can learn on how to accept uncertainty and then reduce our worry. So we have to kind of learn to accept uncertainty in order to reduce our worry about it. So one of the strategies that we use here is to challenge your intolerance of uncertainty and let go of your intolerance of uncertainty. So basically you have to accept that things are uncertain and that we don't always know what's going to happen. So by addressing your need for certainty, you're dealing with one of your positive beliefs about worry, which drive you to keep worrying. So by reducing your need for certainty, you'll also reduce your drive to worry. If we challenge our intolerance of uncertainty, that can also help us too. So I get it, challenging our thoughts when they feel so overwhelming and really strong, and they're kind of strong, maybe stronger than our own thoughts about it, right? Sometimes we're kind of battling in our minds. We can feel these really strong feelings, but we also maybe know that they're irrational, but the one voice is a little bit stronger than the other. And sometimes it helps, again, to ask ourselves maybe some of those questions that were listed on the slide before in order to help us understand how intolerance may be helpful or unhelpful in our lives. And by taking a look at those questions, you can try and answer, I guess, as honestly as possible. You might be surprised at yourself and what comes from those questions. And by answering those, it might actually help you deal with the fact that, you don't really have any certainty, and that's okay. It's not really going to change the outcome. So some of the questions that we can ask ourselves, again, are, do you tend to predict bad things will happen just because they are uncertain? If something new is happening in your life and you don't really know what to expect, do you tend to kind of go into that negative bias and assume that something bad will happen? Is that a reasonable thing to do? What is the likelihood that maybe a positive or a neutral outcome might happen? If we look at something, we have three options, right? Something good could happen, something neutral could happen, or something bad could happen. So 33% of the time, something bad may happen. But 66% of the time, something good or neutral might happen. But we tend to avoid that 66% and focus on that 33% of something bad could happen. In saying that, how likely is it that what you predict, so maybe it's that bad thing, how likely is it that that will happen? Is it possible to live with a small chance that something negative may happen, given that its likelihood is low? Can you live with some of the uncertainties of life? And how do we do that? And can you do this in other situations that you find difficult? Right? So some of these questions are really helpful to us in, again, examining that intolerance of uncertainty and looking at ourselves and saying, okay, what is it about uncertainty that I really struggle with, and how can I try and challenge that belief in a way so that I can overcome this and not have to carry this with me all the time? So again, part of that, and by asking ourselves those questions, it comes along with being curious, right? So be curious about what's happening for you. What emotions are coming up? What thoughts are coming up? Do you have feelings about it? What behaviors come from those things? And again, then we have to decide whether or not we let go of those fears and let go of that need for certainty. And then after that, we have to accept that that's part of life, and that change and uncertainty are normal and things that we have to deal with, I guess, because that's just a part of our everyday lives. So when you are emotionally distressed, your mind tends to be focused on the future with fear fueled by the past. So an antidote to this style of thinking is to practice becoming more present focused and accepting of your current experiences. So that's where this mindfulness techniques come in, right? So when we're able to stay in the present, we're not as fearful about, excuse me, the past or the future, because we're not as concerned with those things because we're staying in the present. So it helps you. And again, when you're in that kind of mind frame of thinking about the future and worrying, sometimes bringing yourself back into the present can be really grounding. It can really help us avoid getting stuck in that loop of worry and fear, because we're not there. We're here in the moment. So letting go of our need for certainty and accepting that this is an inevitable part of life is easier said than done. And when we find ourselves demanding certainty and predictability, and lack flexibility and tolerance for uncertainty and change, our attention is very future focused, and our minds worry in attempt to gain certainty and control. So in essence, our mind is coping with that sense of needing certainty by worrying about it. But in reality, it's a vicious cycle, and it just kind of perpetuates the other. So there's a 5-step process that we're going to kind of go through to help address your need for certainty. So the first step is recognizing or acknowledging when you're feeling the need for certainty and wanting to use worry to achieve this. So we first have to become aware. And this again goes back to that mindfulness technique of attention retraining. So notice where your thoughts are. Notice how you're feeling. How are your thoughts making you feel? Become aware of what's happening in your body, in your mind, and develop that skill of noticing and having an awareness. So once we're able to do that and develop that awareness, then we can make an active choice to not respond to the need and instead decide to let go and accept uncertainty by turning our attention to being more present focused rather than future focused. So being more present focused can help bring about an acceptance of uncertainty. If you're focused on the present rather than the future, then uncertainty about the future is less likely to bother you. Obviously, your mind may drift back to the worry and that uncertainty and needing that control. But again, just kind of repeat the steps of practicing being aware, not responding, letting go of the need for uncertainty, bringing yourself back into the present moment. And again, bringing yourself back every time that happens. So again, it really does encompass all of those mindfulness skills that we've been talking about, in the sense of developing an awareness, pausing when instead of kind of jumping to that immediate reaction, choosing to let go when we don't have to stay in that mind loop or that future-oriented worry, bring ourselves back into the present moment, whether it be through mindful walking, a body scan, a meditation, even a grounding exercise, but just bring yourself back into the present. And again, just be kind to yourself and notice when your mind starts slipping back into that pattern. So another helpful strategy is following the 3 basic steps of being aware of what you're currently thinking and what you're feeling in your body. So again, using your breath to maintain being in the present. What are you noticing when you feel that sense of I need certainty? What kind of things happen for you? What kind of thoughts start coming up in your head? What kind of body sensations? So by acknowledging any of those thoughts and feelings and maybe saying, like that's what it is, that can really help us in being able to diminish the intensity of those feelings. Letting go. So letting go of the need for a quick fix by saying something to help you let go of your need for uncertainty. So maybe it's only a need for certainty. I just have to let it go. Right? So by acknowledging that thought that I need certainty and challenging that with, okay, this is just the thought that I'm having that I need certainty, but I just need to let that go and say, I'm okay with certainty. Maybe you have to reassure yourself, I am okay, things will be okay. We're kind of developing more of that internal dialogue that can help us let go of that need. Being non-judgmental. So by bringing kind of a gentle curiosity to our thoughts that may be drifting away and kind of getting away on us, without judging them or needing to change them, right? That's not the point. It's not to judge ourselves or criticize ourselves for the fact that we get into those mind loops, because again, our mind tends to wander naturally. But it's more about, again, noticing that and not judging yourself, but just bringing yourself back and return your focus to the here and now and focus your attention again on sensory stuff. So the sounds around you, the feelings in your body, your breath, maybe the task that you're doing at hand, maybe how things are, if you're kind of working hands-on, how that's feeling, right? Something that's important for us to talk about, because we did talk about those unhelpful coping strategies, is to talk about some helpful ones and some healthy strategies that we can use when we are feeling overwhelmed and distressed. So things like exercise, right? Exercise can be a great way to get yourself into the present moment because you're using your body and you're kind of focused on a certain task or a certain goal, and it really brings you back into the present. And it can also kind of help maybe burn off some steam that we might be having, some anxiety that you might be feeling. Exercise can also be a good way of calming the body down, I guess. So through yoga or even just like a nice kind of calm walk. So there's lots of ways that exercise is a great tool for us to use to cope. Talking about the problem. I know I'm probably a little bit biased as a therapist, but talking about our stuff is really helpful. When it gets, again, like we talked about earlier with that pressure cooker, when things stay inside and we internalize them and we don't have a way or an outlet for them, they just linger and they build and build and build, and then they come out in maybe unhelpful ways or ways that we wouldn't like them to. So talking about that, whether that be with a therapist or a trusted friend or family member or your partner, that's really helpful. And if you don't have somebody to kind of speak to, maybe that's something that you need to explore the option of, is finding somebody that you can speak with. Eating healthy is something that can be really helpful for us in terms of managing our emotions. There's a big connection between food and mood and our gut health and how that influences our minds. So healthy eating is going to be good for you and your body, but it can also be good for your mind. Again, seeking professional help, like I said, I'm biased, but there's no harm in seeking professional help. Sometimes we do just need a little extra help with our problems or with what's going on in our lives. You don't have to be kind of going through any sort of a crisis in order to seek professional help. It could just be that you're just struggling kind of with day-to-day things and just don't know why. And you're curious to explore that a little bit more. I know I've mentioned this in the first session, I believe, but if anyone is interested in getting or seeking more help, we are offering a free counseling clinic right now. You get a free 45-minute session, and you from there, if more resources are needed, we'll direct you kind of where we think would be helpful. So if anyone's interested in that, they can contact CMHA about that. Using relaxation techniques. So like we talked about, the deep breathing or a body scan, maybe a meditation. So those can be really helpful strategies as well. CMHA just posted the email that you would use if you are interested in the counseling. So just make sure to grab that if you are. So social support is also a huge one, and one that I think we can all relate to is really tricky right now because of everything going on and not necessarily being able to spend time that we used to with our friends and family because of COVID. But connecting with anybody in any way that we can be really helpful. whether it be through FaceTime. And sometimes it kind of feels like, ugh. And I've recognized this feeling in myself of like, oh, I don't want to FaceTime. I don't want to be on the phone, right? I'd rather have that in-person connection. But once I do it, and once I have that connection and I get that time with my friend or family member, it feels so good. It really fills your cup. So it's just about kind of overcoming that I guess kind of negative feeling about having to do it online because of everything going on. And problem solving techniques, right? So kind of trying to strategize a little bit, like maybe creating a step-by-step process of, if I do feel overwhelmed, if I have overwhelming feelings, what am I going to do in that moment, and kind of go through the step-by-step in order to facilitate a better response in myself. What do I need in that moment? What do I need when I feel overwhelmed? And how do I give myself that so that I can, one, minimize my overwhelming feelings, but also at the same time help myself get through that moment as well. Does anyone have any other techniques that they can think of for healthy coping strategies that they want to share? Looking outside. Yeah, I tend to do that a lot during my day, looking outside and just enjoying the clouds and the sun or whatever's happening. Yeah. Sleep is definitely key. Having a healthy, a normal and kind of regulated sleep schedule is really important in terms of kind of helping your own emotions. When we're tired, we can't deal with things the same way we would if we're rested, right? Reading, journaling, music, gardening, great. Yeah. And I would imagine that for gardening, right, it's a full body experience. You're using your body, you're engaging your senses. It's really tactile. Coloring. It's interesting that you are kind of wondering if coloring is procrastinating rather than it being a coping mechanism. I'm curious about that. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people said journaling, which is great. For any of you who are journaling, I definitely encourage that and kind of acknowledge, like, keep going with that. That's awesome that you're doing that. That's a really good, I think that would be a great problem solving technique, Jessica, in terms of, yeah, when we have one of those big kind of tasks that we have to do and we're noticing that sense of resistance and, ugh, I just don't feel like doing it, by kind of getting up and getting yourself on the go and just doing something small can, again, get us through and get us on to that path of doing something else. Something I like to do is make art. That's just kind of doing anything creative. It could be music, it could be art, it could be dance if anyone is interested in those kind of things. Those are healthy coping strategies. Right. So again, when we have a problem, instead of avoiding that problem, by dealing with that problem, it actually helps everything else, like you said, Deborah, fall into place. So it actually it actually is a helpful thing, right? When we write things down, I think that's why journaling is such a great technique. So when we write something down, it's really helpful because it gets everything from in here and it puts it in front of us and we're able to look at it, and it seems more manageable because there's some distance in between us and the problem or what's happening. So I think that's a great technique to use, and it definitely would help you feel better. I would imagine something I may suggest to you is, to any of you, if you're writing especially about anger or something that really frustrates you, a tip would be, when you're done writing that, if you feel comfortable to, rip it up. Ripping paper is so cathartic, and it feels so good when you get to do it, and just that sound and the feeling of ripping, kind of using that body, it really is a very like full body experience. So if anyone wants to try that and let me know how it goes, I'd love to hear. So Hannah, I'm not sure what you mean. I don't believe that it's more helpful to ignore your worries than to face them. I think we have to face our worries. If we don't, like we talked about earlier, if we ignore them and if we just leave them inside, then that pressure cooker idea comes up and they build and build and build. The thing is, we can't also, there's a balance there, right? We can't we can't decide to let that kind of simmer inside of us for hours and hours and hours and not do anything about it. So by giving into them, I guess, you're actually increasing your overwhelm and your distress. But by using strategies to help you cope with that and to cope with those worries and get yourself out of that negative loop so you're not stuck in it, that's not necessarily ignoring it. It's actually helping you calm down. It's bringing your nervous system down, and it's helping you come to a more rational point and bring you into the present so that you're not in that kind of overwhelm and distress. Choosing your battles, right? So I think there's definitely, it's hard because again, I think maybe we might be dealing here with that idea of worry being something that's helpful for us. And we have that positive belief about worry, which is fine because again, if we don't worry, then maybe we're not thinking things through as much sometimes, or maybe we won't be as prepared. But I think, again, it's that fine line between worrying being something that's helpful for us versus unhelpful for us. So if we find that we're worrying and it's helpful, we actually, it helps us feel prepared. It helps us look at all scenarios. Great. That's a useful way of using worry. But if that worry is just kind of keeping us stuck in our heads and we're losing time kind of worrying and thinking, and we're noticing that it brings up overwhelming feelings and our body just feels uncomfortable, then that's unhelpful worry. I'm not saying that we shouldn't worry because again, I think it's a natural kind of thought that we have to worry. But it's just about how much is tolerable for us, and how much it's helping or hurting in terms of those things. And again, really thinking like, if I worry about this, is it really going to change the outcome? Do I have control over this situation or do I not? Yeah, so accepting that we can't control everything. And again, a part of our workbook this week, so again, if anyone didn't grab that workbook, I would kind of scroll up into the chat and make sure that you grab the link. Both links for week 1 and week 2 are in the chat. So the workbook this week is all about kind of learning to tolerate uncertainty and kind of addressing those things in a way that's helpful. Great. So we are all kind of finished up today, but if anyone has any questions or wonderings or things that really stood out for them today and you'd like to share, I'd love to hear. So what if you are a person that asks the opinions of too many people? So again, I think the intention behind it is where it might be important to look at. So if you're asking the opinion because it's helpful for you to hear other perspectives, I can relate to that in the sense that I do like to hear maybe what other people think about a certain situation because it helps, again, just to gauge, what's going on and maybe different perspectives on things. But if you oh my goodness, sorry. That scared me. If you're relying on that opinion, and if you're relying on needing other people's opinions to make your choices, then that might be kind of leaning towards an unhelpful coping strategy, I guess. So asking the opinions of others is not a problem, but if you need other people's opinions in order to make decisions because maybe you don't trust your own voice or you don't trust your own opinion or you don't trust your own judgment, then that's a deeper thing that may have to be looked at, right? Because the last thing that you would want, I guess, is to get into a position, I guess, where you don't trust yourself and don't trust your judgment, or believe that you can make decisions for yourself. So I guess it just depends on why you're using that strategy and what it is that you're seeking from those people that you're asking, and maybe the intention behind asking their opinions. And again, I think that's that idea of learning to trust yourself and how to learn to trust yourself is something that's tricky. And maybe something that maybe you need to reflect on a little bit further. Maybe you do that on your own. Maybe you seek help for that. That's really, it is tough to trust yourself, definitely. And I'm sure there's reasons behind why you don't trust yourself, and maybe some beliefs there or thought processes that you learned or developed because of experiences you've gone through that have created that belief. but I guess thinking about past experiences and looking kind of, do you have facts to back up the fact that you don't trust yourself, right? Kind of going through that process of asking yourself the questions and reflecting on that a little bit more. So thanks for those questions. Those are great. Again, if anyone has any more questions, I'm sticking around for a little bit, but otherwise you can all head out and enjoy the rest of your day.